Hello everyone, my name is Taylor and I'm one of the graduate assistants at the Writing Center, and this presentation is going to briefly cover the basics of APA 7, and I will also point out the changes that were made in APA 7 that are different from APA 6. So APA is one of the commonly used formats for papers, and it's commonly used in the social sciences, including psychology, social work, education. It's also used often in nursing, and many other different types of papers. And APA, like other formats, dictates the style, in-text citations, references, and the language used throughout the paper. When writing in APA style, it's typically preferred that you use a third-person point of view unless you're discussing research that you personally conducted, like a study that you completed, not just a research in a database. It also prefers that you use active voice versus passive voice, and it outlines that you should use language that is clear, concise, and plain. And so you want to make sure that you're using a formal and professional tone when you're writing in APA rather than writing in casual language like you would when you're speaking to a friend or something like that. Generally, APA should be typed and double-spaced, and it should be in 10 to 12 point font Times New Roman or a similar serif font. And so this is a bit different from APA 6 that had a more narrow amount of size and fonts that you could be used. And so APA 7 expanded this, and so your font size is dependent on which font you're using. And so we have some examples here. So you can see that 11-point font should be used with if you're using Calibri, 10-point font should be used with Lucida, so on and so forth. And so I would typically suggest that you use like 11 or 12-point font for Times New Roman, but you can always ask your instructor if they have a preference. It should also have 1-inch margins on all sides, and it should have a page number in the upper right-hand corner of every page. And so this is different from APA 6, where the running head had the title of the paper in all caps and then the page number, and it was different on the title page versus the rest of the paper. And so APA 7 has changed this, where in the header you only have the page number on all pages, and you no longer will have your title or the words running head in your header. Typically, if you're writing a paper in APA, there will be 4 sections. That will be the title page, the abstract, the main body of the paper, and then your references. However, I will note that this is just a general rule, and your instructor may ask for additional sections or may remove sections, such as not requiring an abstract. And so always resort to your instructor and your rubric and assignment sheet for which sections of an APA paper you should have. The title page is one of the changes that was made from APA 7 that's different from APA 6. And so now the title page will have the title of your paper centered and bold, and then you'll have all the information will be double spaced, but you'll have an extra double space inserted in between the title of your paper and the author or year name. You will then list your name, or if it's a group paper or something, all of the authors, and then you'll have your affiliation, so that would be your department and then Lewis University. You'll then have the course number and name, the name of the instructor, and the assignment due date. And so you can see that if you have written a paper in APA 6 previously, you can see that there's more information that's required on the title page now. And so we have an example here on the screen. And then you can also see that only the page number in the upper right-hand corner is included in that header, which, as I mentioned earlier, is different from APA 6, where you would typically have the words running head and then the title of your paper and then the page number. The next major section of an APA paper is the abstract, and the abstract is basically a summary of your paper, and it typically will include the purpose, your main points, the methods of research, and the findings. But I will note you should not have analysis or like your takeaways and interpretation of the research in the abstract. It should just be the main points. The heading of this page should be abstract, and it should be centered in bold on the first line of the second page of your document. And once you start writing the actual abstract, it will not be indented as typical paragraphs are. It will just be flushed all the way to the left margin, all of the lines. And then your abstract should be no more than 250 words, and it will be double spaced. And so if any of you have written in the APA 6, you will know that this is a difference from APA 6, where there was a minimum word count that you had to hit for your abstract. So now there's just the maximum. But you can see the importance of making sure that you're writing clearly and concisely and getting to the point, because you only have 250 words to do this. And then the last part of the abstract that you may or may not have to do, always make sure that you ask your professor, is to add keywords. And the purpose of keywords is to make it easier for others to find your article if they were searching a database or something like that. And so keywords will start on a new line. It will be indented in, and then you'll write keywords in italics and a colon, and then you'll list 3 to 5 words that relate to your essay. So if I were writing a paper on depression, my keywords or the treatment of depression, my keywords might be depression, cognitive behavioral therapy, and a type of medication that I talked about in my paper. And so overall, it might be easier to write your abstract and keywords if they are required after you've completed your paper. And this way you're making sure that you're summarizing what you did end up actually writing about in your paper, whereas if you write the abstract and keywords first, as you do your research, the paper might shift a little bit, and then you might have to then change your abstract. So I do recommend writing the abstract last. Continuing on with abstracts, I want to note that the abstract is not an introduction of your paper, because the abstract covers all aspects of your paper, whereas an introduction only gives brief context to your topic and the central idea or purpose for writing your paper in more simple terms. So you can think of the abstract as a bad movie trailer because it gives away the ending and kind of the findings of your paper, whereas an introduction is a good movie trailer that pulls you in and gets you interested but doesn't ruin the ending. Level headings are another major part of an APA paper, and while they're not always required for your assignments, I do find them helpful for helping you to organize your ideas and stay on focus for each paragraph. And so I like to think of level headings as I do as I do an outline. And so in an outline, if your Roman numerals are your main points and then capital letters are your subpoints, a level 1 heading would be those Roman numerals, and a level 2 heading would be those capital letters. And so with each level heading, you're getting more specific into a point, just as how you create an outline. That being said, each level heading should have a healthy amount of text and information under it, because you should be comprehensively covering that point. And so I personally have never seen someone come into the Writing Center with any level heading past a 3. And that's because if you're getting down to level 4 and 5s, you're going to have a very long paper, maybe like a thesis or a dissertation, because that means you're getting very specific into your topic and covering lots of details of that topic. And to make sure that you're comprehensively covering those subpoints or those specific parts, you need to have a healthy amount of text, which would mean your paper would be very long. So please keep that in mind as you're making your level headings, and be mindful of the purpose of getting more specific, and if it's necessary. Another thing to note is that the title of your paper should appear centered in bold at before your introduction of your paper. It should not be labeled introduction, because it's assumed that after the title of your paper on that first page, that your introduction would come first. That also being said, the title of your paper being centered in bold doesn't technically count as a level 1 heading, so you would still, after your introduction, you still want to start with a level 1 heading, whatever your first main point is, because your introduction isn't necessarily like a main point that then you're getting more specific with level 2 headings. I hope that makes sense, and if you have any questions about level headings, please make an appointment or call or email the Writing Center so we can explain that a little based on your topic, because sometimes people do get confused with the level headings. The next main section of your paper will be the main body of your paper, and that was going to begin on page 3 of your document if you have an abstract. If there's no abstract, it'll begin on page 2, and so this will contain the page number in the header in the upper right hand corner, and it does not have to have any other information in the header. Then you will have the title of your paper, as I said, on the first line, centered in bold in title case, so all the main words should be capitalized. The text of your paper should be double spaced, and you should not have any extra spacing in between paragraphs. And then it's also important, typically in APA papers, to have sources to support the claims being made in the text because it is a scholarly format. And these can be parenthetical and text citations that can be quotes, block quotes, or paraphrasing. Any content that's not your own original thought should be cited, whether it's a direct quote or a paraphrase. The last main section of an APA paper will be your references, and so it should be titled, centered in bold, references if there's multiple sources, or reference if you only used one source. The entries should be in alphabetical order by the author's last name, and all of these should be double-spaced. And then the first line of each entry should be flushed left, and subsequent lines are indented. So this is called a hanging indent, and there's a way to insert a hanging indent in Word that you can look up, or you can call the Writing Center and we can explain how to do this. But I will note that you should not indent each line on your own because it tends to mess up the formatting. And then we will talk more about the specifics of references later in the presentation. I briefly mentioned in-text citations, so now we're going to talk a little bit more specifically about these. But when you're using a source in a paper, you need to provide the parenthetical citation. And so in EPA, this includes the author, the year, and the page or paragraph number if you're direct quoting. And this should all be separated by a comma. You can see another example of the in-text citations here. I will also note that if you're using a page range, so if you have a direct quote that starts on one page and ends on another page, you should use lowercase pp in period and then put the page range. If you're just using one page, then it would just be lowercase p period. When the source being cited includes more than one author and you are using it in the signal phrase of the sentence, you should use the word and. And if you're using it in a parenthetical citation, you should use the ampersand between the two authors. And then if you're citing two or more works within one parenthetical citation, so say one of your ideas came from two different sources and you need to cite them both, you will separate those citations by the semicolon, but they'll be in the same set of parentheses. So you can see those examples below. The first example is what it would look like if you used the authors in the signal phrase of the sentence. You can see that it's the word and instead of an ampersand. And you can also see that the year goes with the authors. So that's important to note that the year and authors always go together. So if you're using the authors in the signal phrase, the year should go next to that in parentheses. And obviously, if it's in the parenthetical citation, the year goes in the parenthetical citation. So in that first example, if it was a direct quote and you had to have a page or paragraph number, you would have the author and the years in the signal phrase, and then the page or paragraph number would go at the end of the sentence in parentheses. And then in that third example, it shows how you would format a parenthetical citation if there were two separate sources that you needed to cite. If you have three or more authors in a source, you use the following format. So you would only have the first author's last name followed by the phrase et al. Only all has a period after it, and then you would put a comma and then the year. So it would be Williams et al. Period, comma, and then the year. And then the next example is what it would be if you use the authors in the signal phrase. So if it's 3 or 20 authors, it's the same et al. Phrase. So the first part of this slide talks about information that I already talked about. So when you're introducing a quote with a signal word or phrase, you should always have the year next to it. And you should use the word and in the sentence and the ampersand in the parenthetical citation. And when you're quoting, you should have the author's last name, the year of publication, and the page or paragraph number. With a paraphrase, you don't need that page or paragraph number. And you should always keep direct quotes brief. And so less than 40 words is a normal quote. If you have more than 40 words, you're going to have to format it as a block quote. But APA does prefer that you use paraphrases instead of direct quotes because a paraphrase shows a higher level of thought where you're able to understand what the authors are saying and then can put it into your own words versus just copy and pasting essentially the information from an article into your paper. And so it is preferred to use the paraphrases. which means if it's preferred to use the paraphrases, you certainly want to have as few block quotes as possible because that's a lot of content that's not your own thought process. This is just a chart that we put in the PowerPoint to show some signal verbs that are helpful or may be used when you're introducing quotes. I'm not going to go through all of these, so you can feel free to take a picture of this chart if you would like, but rather than saying the authors say every single time, you can switch it up and use a different signal verb throughout your paper so it's not so repetitive. For paraphrasing or summarizing, as I've said multiple times, you will always want to have the citation for paraphrases or summarizing because although you are putting into your own words, it was still not your own original thought or idea, and so you still need to give credit where it's due. You can have the parenthetical citation, or you can use the authors and year in the signal phrase. For paraphrasing or summarizing, you also need to significantly change the wording of the idea you're using. It's not enough to just click the synonym button for a word or two and call it your own words now. And for the paraphrases, you do not need to have the page or paragraph number. While you can have it and it's not necessarily wrong, it's not necessary. And as I said, paraphrasing is preferred over a direct quote. So some things are hard to paraphrase. So if you're using a statistic or a definition of a word, sometimes it's near impossible to paraphrase it because you can't significantly change the wording, or it would take away from the meaning of the definition or the statistic, and so those are the times when direct quoting is probably the best option. For the references page, you should have, as I said, the title should be references or reference, bold and centered at the top of your page. I'm not going to go over this because this is repetitive, but here's a reminder. For the sources in your references page, each entry will be listed in alphabetical order based on the author's last name, and this is because the author's name is inverted, and so since it's inverted, you're going to go from the author's last name since that's what's going to be listed first in the entry. So you'll have the last name, comma, and then the first and middle initials. And then for the titles of your references, for smaller works and for like article titles and for books, the titles will be in sentence case. So only the first word will be capitalized, as well as any word following a colon or a dash, and proper nouns are all capitalized. And these smaller works like articles will not be italicized or underlined. So you can see in the example here we have format most common for certain majors, colon, and essay. And you can see that only the F in format and the A and N are capitalized and everything else is lowercase. So here you can see an example of a reference for a book. You can see that only the first letter of the first words are capitalized. You can see that the longer works, such as the book title or journal title, if you were using an article from a journal, are italicized. And then shorter works like the chapter in this case or the article title are not italicized. And so in the case of a book, you have the authors first, you have the last name, and then the first and middle initials, the year, then you have the title of the chapter, the title of the book, the edition, if it's any edition other than the first, and then you have the publisher last. Here we have some more examples of references that are commonly used in APA, and so if you're citing from an online periodical or an online journal, this is how you would format it. So as you can see here, you have the author, the year, the title of the article in that sentence case, so just title is capitalized here. You then have the title of the online periodical or the journal in italics because it is that longer work, but the journal title is title case, so all of those main words are capitalized. You then have the volume number, which should also be italicized, and the issue number if it is, if there is one, and then you have the page numbers and the DOI number. And so DOI should be available on the databases. Sometimes you have to look around for it, and it's hard to find. Also for anyone who wrote a paper in APA 6 previously and you're now writing an APA 7, you'll see that there's no longer the title DOI and then the number. It's formatted as a URL, and so you want to keep that URL in there. And then if you're citing a website, make sure, one, that you're using credible resources, such as like government websites or like American Heart Association or something like that. And often with websites, there's not a separate author for each article. So for example, if you're using the Mayo Clinic for a specific disease, if you go on that website, there's often not like Dr. So-and-so as the author for that page. It's just the Mayo Clinic. And so that's called a corporate author or an organization as an author. And so rather than saying there's no author, you would put that organization. So Mayo Clinic would be in place of the author, or in our example on this slide, it's Lewis University. And then you have the date, or if there's no date, you would do N period, D period, the title of the article, and then the URL. And in APA 7, you do not take the URL out, you keep it hyperlinked. I know I went through this information quickly and it's just a brief overview of APA, so if you need more assistance with APA, please, of course, always feel free to make an appointment at the Writing Center. You can also visit our Lewis OWL, which has our APA 7 resource guide. The Purdue OWL has a ton of great information on APA, and there's other examples here. Since this presentation is virtual instead of in the classroom as we typically do these presentations, and you can't ask questions in a live forum like we typically do, please call the Writing Center or send us an email if you have any questions about APA format or this presentation, and we would be happy to clarify for you. Thank you for listening to this presentation, and we hope to see you in the Writing Center soon.